The video games industry has been around for quite some time, hasn't it? Almost 50 years. And by now there are a couple of things that should be a bit obvious, but if not, this is the top 7 things about video games that you should know by now. A show dedicated to all those details that some people may gloss over or some people may not be aware of yet because they're young, they just started getting into video games and aren't really up to speed with everything that's going on. So in the hopes that we all understand exactly what's going on, let's begin with number 7. Developers are human beings. Now I've seen a lot of hatred directed towards video game developers, the people coding, the people modeling, the people doing the work, the brunt of it, the grunt of it, the peons, if you will, of the video games industry. There's been a lot of just utter hatred directed towards a lot of them. Mostly because they're the ones that we see. They're the ones that occasionally have works at X studio written in their Twitter handle and get a lot of abuse. But it's important to remember that they are human beings. They're just trying to do a job that is a small part of a large project that they do not control, that they do not have any sort of real influence over. I don't know, I may be responsible for occasionally saying that some interface designer should be tied to a tree and have live geese thrown at them, but that's not something I would ever actually do to another person. That's just something I say for comedic effect when an interface is so badly designed that it makes me want to look Todd Howard in the face and yell at him for 5 hours why he thinks copying the iPod was a good idea. Now that again is something that is an exaggeration. It's not something I would actually do, and I don't encourage anybody to do that unless it changes his mind. I mean, there's probably a more polite way to do it. So in the idea that they are human beings, it's not really okay to harass human beings, is it? We're all human beings. Let's face it, getting harassed is kind of unpleasant, it's annoying, it's uncomfortable, and if you're coming from the nebulous areas of the internet that thinks, well, if you don't like harassment, just don't get on the internet. How's this for a change? If you like harassing people, don't go on the internet. Yeah, no, that's never gonna happen. Oh dear God, that's never gonna happen. That's the stupidest thing I've said in this year. No, but seriously, developers are human beings, so they should be treated as such, which leads us to number 6. Developers can't work for free. Now, I know I've seen this in every Steam thread like 50 times, usually published by people that have no idea how things work. They keep saying things like, well, if I was president or if I had my way, developers would be working to give us games for free, and they'd all be for free. They program them for free. Why? These people aren't 12 years old. The developers, I mean, the people posting it are. The developers aren't 12 years old. They don't live with their parents, and even if they do, they still have bills to pay. They have to eat. They have to live. They have to pay taxes, maybe one day take a vacation, maybe, perhaps, not be ashamed of what they do when they get asked, well, what do you do for a living at their high school reunion? And some say, well, I'm a neurosurgeon. Somebody says, oh, I'm an investment banker. I ruined the world. And what do you do? I make video games. Make video games, that's so lame. Until they realize that Fortnite is the biggest thing in history and GTA 5 made more money than any of them. But let's face it, not every game developer is going to make Fortnite and GTA 5. A lot of them are just going to make the walking animation system of some game that's going to be shelled out for $20 on Steam on sale, and then everybody's going to forget about it. Some of them are going to work at Blizzard, where apparently not a lot of people can actually afford to work at. And by that I mean that they're not really paid enough to live in Irvine, California. They live in their cars, they sleep on benches, they basically are homeless while working at one of the biggest gaming companies in the industry. Let's not forget the overtime they're not paid for, the constant stress of having to keep to a schedule made by somebody that thinks that if if a woman is able to carry a child to term in 9 months, then 9 women should be able to do it in 1 month, right? That's how the fabled man-hour works. Most developers don't get paid for any of that. Instead, they get fired usually. Once the project is done, they get fired because they're easily replaceable, because they're just cogs in a machine and, as I mentioned earlier, not really considered human beings. And that is somewhat because, number 5, the industry exists to make money. Make no mistake about it, that is why it exists. Every time you say, well, that's very money grubbing of the developer or of the publisher, yeah, that's what they're there to do. They're there to make money. And as long as they do something that makes money, it doesn't matter if you think it's over the line, if it's exaggerated, if it makes money and doesn't create a big enough PR problem, a optics issue, a marketing debacle if you will, then it will continue to happen as long as it makes money. Preferably increasing amounts of money, because it's not just about paying the people that work there. It's not just about Bobby Kotick getting a third gold-plated jet. It's also because of number 4. The industry is run mostly by evil entities. And by this I don't mean the CEOs. They can be interchangeable. But the shareholders, because at one point in history, companies needed money to escape the clutches of the retail store monopoly on the industry, so they consolidated, they bought each other up, and through that they needed money, so they needed investors, and so in the industry there came a large number of entities that control pretty much every major game company. And these entities can be banks, hedge funds, let's say not drug cartels, interest groups that are bent on destroying mankind. You know, they may not be the most understanding entities in the world because they are specifically driven by only one thirst, and that is to make money. More money than they had earlier, and they will push said games companies to make more and more and more and more money. Otherwise, they will get upset and change, well, the people in charge and replace them with their own people who will do anything to make more and more and more and more money. And if it stops, well, it just stops. They don't care about the end results. They are just in there for the money. Some gaming companies, yeah, even though they are there to make money, they are also there to make money from games, from art, from, you know, giving people the tools to enjoy themselves. But the shareholders, the stakeholders, the investors, they would probably, were laws not in effect, just sell off the organs of their employees to make up for any losses. Now I know that this sounds like some caricature of capitalism, but you're thinking it too, right? I know you're thinking it. And because as you go up in the chain of command of the gaming industry, you end up with progressively more evil entities, then it's the wonder that, number 3, most games are fundamentally broken. They ship broken with the intention of them always being broken. They only get fixed if they sell well enough to warrant them being fixed, and they end up being broken at launch because the developers don't have the time they need to actually make a game that works, because the launch date was set years in advance and the marketing was paid for months and months in advance, and the game itself sometimes is just the mug, if you will, the hat with the logo on it. It's often treated as a nothing compared to the marketing push surrounding it that's supposed to sell the actual game. And developers, they know they cannot have a perfectly working game on day one. They're perfectly aware of this, because it's not up to them to decide how the resources of the development process is allocated. I mean, in a big company, in a smaller one, yeah, it's probably going to be an okay game. In CD Projekt's case, they say, okay, we're not going to ship it unless it works. But in most situations, in the traditional video games industry, it's Fallout 76. It's an Ubisoft game, if you will. It's shipping a game without the draw a frame DirectX call in the game and expecting Nvidia to fix it in their driver, which is what happens quite often. But even so, even though sometimes at release games are terrible and may never be fixed or are completely unfixable, there's always number 2. Every game is someone first and maybe sucks. Everybody's first game will have a different value to them as opposed to the value it would have to somebody else. Somebody that played it last year instead of when they were born. Well, if you're playing games when you were born, well, that's gonna be a strange thing to explain. Okay, it doesn't matter. That wasn't what I was going for. What I meant was the game that you play for the first time and are able to build memories of the earliest. That will always be endearing to you, even though it may have been a steaming pile of absolute crap. But because you consider it as your first, as the one you have no standard of comparison for, even when you see better games out there, there's still a hierarchy in your brain that puts the first one at the top. And that really skews your perspective of every other game to the point where you kind of understand why Call of Duty sells so many copies. For many, it was one of their first games, and even if it was the one with the fish AI, they would still consider it as being great, because for them it was. And when people say it's not, they will defend it because it is part of their person, that is a core component of their persona, their id or ego. I don't know which one it is. It's somewhere in there. Ask Freud, he'll know. So it's important to remember that. You may be talking to somebody and see them have very fond memories and constantly praising a game that you know to be an absolute pile of crap, like Rogue Agent or whatever the one with Mickey Rourke was called, or whatever thing they're playing on YouTube right now is the next hotness, some Slenderman thing, I don't know. Remember that they may actually believe what they're saying because for them it was true at one point, and eventually they will get to a period of self-reflection, but they're not there, so provoking them is probably a bad idea. That'll just drive them deeper down into the rabbit hole, and that's how you get mega gigantic super ultra turbo cathedrals smack dab in the capital, but that's a whole other matter. But it does lead us to number 1. Games aren't made for you. I mean you specifically, you as an individual. Games are not made for you. Unless we're talking about a really niche sector. Some Paradox games will probably be made for you. Some indie game will probably be made for you. Something made by somebody very obsessive about a subject that you may have an interest in, that may be made for you, but games at large are not. They are made for demographics. They are made for people earning between X and Y of the ages Z and T from countries A, B, and C. They are made for data, not for you. They're made for statistics. They're made for a spreadsheet that shows what approximation of numbers of wallets would open up and fling money, and the amount of money they would fling on a product that has certain characteristics. I know that may sound harsh, that may sound cold, but in the grand scheme of the video games industry, that is how projects are approved. It's not just somebody saying, oh my god, I've got this amazing idea. Everybody has amazing ideas, everybody does. And some people also have the skill to pull it off, but they don't have the financial backing. And for the financial backing, they need a spreadsheet of data that shows that wallets will be willing to open up and fling money at the product. Otherwise, there's no game. And no matter how much you would say you want to buy the game, how much you wish it would be made, how many petitions you sign for it to be ushered forth into existence, unless you're one of the wallets on the spreadsheet adding a +1 to a figure numbering in the millions, you don't matter. And even then, you don't matter. Unless there's a million of you, or a sufficiently high number, which for companies like Square Enix, 1 million, not enough, then you still will not matter, because games are not made for you. They're made for the market. So closes the top 7 things about video games that you should probably know by now. I'd like to give one special mention to not really trusting video game reviews, unless you implicitly trust the person that wrote the review, not the publication, because the publication can always screw you over. It's a non-living entity with no inbuilt concept of loyalty, regret, remorse, or accountability. Also, video game scores are still kind of worthless. Goodbye.